Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome, my dear brothers and sisters here at Alwasitv. I'm very, very honored. Giving you a clap, mixing it up a little bit. I'm very honored to have yourself here in the studios. We have Dr. Mulla Karrar Al Kufi. Did I pronounce the name perfectly? Perfect. Iraqi is good?
Got the Iraqi spot on.
Galvi.
Galvi.
That's it. Now I'm fully Iraqi. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And it is an honor to have you. You are a doctor, you're a dentist, and you're a reciter. MashaAllah. The Holy Trinity. You got all three right there. And tell me about you yourself. Like, what got you into the field of medicine? How did you get the title doctor? Let's begin from the very beginning.
That's a very loaded question.
Loaded fries.
Loaded fries
are the best.
Should fill them up with cheese.
Let's start from the very beginning then. So we kind of got a feel that you were born in Iraq, raised in Iran.
Yeah.
Spent 10 years there. You had your schooling. What was like living in Iran as an Iraqi?
Very tough.
Okay.
Very tough. When we lived in Iran, the situation was that we weren't considered to be the citizens of Iran. So we were in limbo. We didn't have a citizenship of Iran. We couldn't go back to Iraq. We couldn't travel outside of Iran. So it was a bit of a difficult situation. And think about it, when you've immigrated to a new country who's got a completely different language. I always put myself in the shoes of my parents, saying if they've moved from one country to another, having to learn a brand new language, having to provide for their family. My dad had to get to working straight away. There was no other opportunity. There was no other help that could come from anywhere else. And the situation is quite dire because there was quite a lot of influx of Iraqis and other groups as well who were coming to Iran. The only thing that kind of kept us, or the common denominator between us and the Iranians was our religion and our faith. But quite a lot of the political decisions and other things that were going on at the time was quite different. So it was very tough, learning, and we had some rules at home, having to learn the Arabic language as well as the Persian language. That was probably the most difficult thing, having to deal with, learning two languages at home. We had to speak Arabic inside the home. That was the rule. And then we spoke Farsi outside.
Right.
But we did go to a Persian school, which was a good thing because we learned the language and we went through the schooling and things. But yeah, Iran was very difficult. Things didn't always go according to plan. You weren't considered a citizen of the country, so you couldn't really apply to go to university. You couldn't represent the country in sports, even if you were good. And that was really difficult. And
Did you play sports growing up?
I was playing sports, and we made it. I was playing basketball when I was younger, and we made it to the state team in Iran. That was representative of Qom and other states, and we were told that I couldn't compete because we didn't have a citizenship. So it was very difficult, especially as a young person having ambitions, at the time.
Because being in that state, you just feel, this is going to sound weird, like a bit of an odd kind of question, but did you feel any less Iranian or evidently less Iranian? Because usually when you're raised in a place, many Australians who, even though they're not born in Australia, they can call themselves Australian proudly. True. Did you feel less Iranian?
Well, I didn't feel Iranian at all.
Right.
It was very obvious that I wasn't Iranian, whether it's my accent or even just my name. My name is, in fact, the most uncommon name in Iran. I've never heard any Iranian name their kids Karrar. And it was maybe now when they've had a bit more exposure to the Iraqi culture and having to travel and come back to Iraq a lot. But back in the day, the name was very obvious, not Iranian. And, it was a new thing to them as well because they'd never had an influx of so many, overseas people to Iran. There was an influx before in the 1970s and the 1980s. There was an influx of Iraqis from Karbala and during the Saddam's, reign. They did come to Iran and they had kind of assimilated very well. And most of those groups were actually Iranians originally. So when they came back, they just kind of got back into their families and whatever they had already. But for us, it was a new thing. It felt like a brand new experience.
And I reckon it must have been more difficult for your parents.
Absolutely.
Because for you, from what I would understand, it would seem kind of second nature because you're brought up into having like these two different cultures. Even though like someone living in Australia may think Iran, Iraq, what's the difference? What, one letter? It sounds very similar.
Absolutely.
But you being in that country, you would have definitely felt, as you explained, the differences. What was it like for your parents? Tell me a bit about them. What did they do?
Yeah.
Who were they?
Yeah, I always put myself in their shoes. I imagine myself because they had to immigrate twice. They
Twice?
immigrated from Iraq to Iran.
Okay.
And then we immigrated from Iran to here.
Correct.
So we had to start
Right.
again twice.
Right.
And that's probably much harder for them than it was for us.
Yeah, true.
And so my dad had to learn the language, had to learn a trade to try to earn some money to provide for his family. And there were different avenues. Some people got into the Hausa, for example, to start learning, the sciences of Ahlulbayt and jurisprudence. And so that they went down that path because there was a monetary value associated with being a student at the time. Quite a lot of people actually ended up joining that path. Other people were into business, and my father had a business mind, so he looked into options and he asked around and had some help from some friends. And that provided him with the opportunity to start some work, and he was doing freelance work. So he would bring materials from the Gulf to Iran, and he would sell it to businessmen in Iraq. So in Iran. So he spent a reasonable amount of time developing that business idea and learning the language and getting himself into that trend. At the same time, I had an older brother who was had finished primary school and he was about to begin high school, and I was at that age of primary school. So having to provide for us to go to school, that was a big thing because we had to pay out of pocket.
Wow.
And so we didn't have access to free education.
That was only limited to Iranians, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
So if you didn't have a citizenship, you had to pay for being. It's just like being an international student
I
here.
can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. But we had to pay for being in primary school. Wow. Yeah. And so that is the moment that sparked the value of education for me, because I could, even though I was pretty young, I still understood to an extent that what I'm getting here, somebody is paying for, and there's value. And somebody's sacrificing something for it. And so that was from an early age.
It's a really good mentality.
I had a hunch that was the case. Yeah.
See, by you sharing that with me, I'm just converting it into how, because many people who come from different cultures seek refuge into a different country, or even move to a different country, go through the same experiences. If you look at people living in Australia, people who are well off have just moved from Australia, let's just say from America or from Canada or from a different country, from New Zealand, for example, and their parents put them in private schools. My question is, would they value being put in a private school where the parents have to pay for that education as much as you had that? And I see a lot of, for example, my brothers, they go to a private school, and there are many kids who are spoiled.
Absolutely.
They go to a very expensive school where parents pay a lot and sacrifice. But that is amazing how you had that from a very young age. So you must have been like, if it was in primary school, you must have been like, is it 6 that they start at that age? Right. That's amazing.
They start a little bit earlier in Iran. They have a different teaching system, and that was one of the things that also made me appreciate what I had done in Iran, because they follow a Japanese learning system.
Right.
In Australia, we follow a Commonwealth, I think English-driven system, like from England, or the Commonwealth-driven system. In Iran, they use a Japanese system, and the Japanese system ideally gets students utilizing their best abilities early on. So you're not bound by being in year one. That's it. You're in year one until you become year two. No, you get the opportunity to move on if you are, progressing. So they teach you quite a lot. And when I came to Australia, I came at the age of 10. I spent a little bit of time in primary school here, and then ended up in high school. And the stuff that they were teaching me in high school, I'd already done. half the mathematics I'd already done in Iran. I was only, 8 or 9 or 10 at the time in Iran in years, 3, 4, and 5. And so quite a lot of the mathematics I'd done. Obviously, the English I struggled with. That was the third language. That was very difficult.
Does not sound like that at all. MashaAllah. It's like I have more of an accent. I'm born and raised here. Which
that was very difficult. Very difficult. In fact, I struggled for. I had the same English teacher from year 7 to year 12, and she would tell you how much I struggled in the first 6 years, 5 years, up until year 11. And then something happened. It clicked and it made sense and it worked.
There's so many questions that literally that's amazing because firstly, the Japanese system, I'm legitimately curious about that because I have my reservations about the Australian education system, and I feel like it's not just me, it's many people who I see on a day-to-day basis who are Muslim and non-Muslim, they have their reservations about it as well. And so, but one thing I've realized is that a lot of the sheikhs who have come from Iran spent like 2-3 months in Australia. When you get to know them personally outside the Islamic, lecture style environment, they're quite well-rounded. Like we had this sheikh who had come from from Iran, Mashhad, spent his first time in Australia, and he had the most perfect American accent. He was very smart, he was very educated, he was very spiritual, and he was very active as well. And a lot of that he accredits to the Iranian education system. You would find even people who were similar to yourself, who had their education in Iran and they come to Australia, they will always say, it's nothing like Iran. Australia, what is this education system? So what is it about, I guess, the Japanese system, but what else was unique about the Iranian schooling at that time? You said you were in Qom, right? Did you spend any other time in any other city?
So I think, I don't remember, because when we first came to Iran, we did move around a little bit.
Okay.
But until such time that I was enrolled in primary school, we were in Qom, and we spent most of our time there after that. But I do know that we did spend a little bit of time in Tehran, which is the capital, and then I think most of our time we spent in Qom.
Yeah.
So all I remember is my time in Qom, which is a beautiful time. Being the neighbor of Sayyidah Fatima al-Ma'souma is something that nobody can experience or nobody can tell you about unless they've experienced it. It is like having a grandmother look down and live with you, and look after you. It was an incredible experience, and we lived very close to the haram, maybe a 15-minute walk.
Wow.
So essentially every day we would go through the haram, say hello, and go for our daily bread. And that was the most amazing experience. I couldn't, because I grew up in that environment. I grew up, opened my eyes on the beautiful lights and the beautiful, courtyards of the Sayyidah Fatima.
Especially that particular shrine as well.
Absolutely.
It's very peaceful.
Peaceful. And it's got a very unique setup that it links one side of Qom to the other side.
Right, yes.
And in order to, it's the shortcut, essentially, from one side to the other. And they've got this really small courtyard. It's a really small one. It's just used for people to come, walk across and move to the other side. And through it, they've got a big curtain, and then they'll open up the curtain, and they've got the shrine right there. So you don't even have to, there's no effort in you going inside. You just have to walk past, turn around, say your salams, and then go off to whatever you were doing for the day. And it's very unique to that shrine because there's no other shrine like that.
That is so true.
That links one side to the other, and essentially you're there every day.
You're taking me. I don't even need to watch a video about a tutorial of the shrine. It's funny because the reason why I say video is because I actually recorded that, a tutorial of, what am I saying tutorial? More of like a virtual walkthrough going into the shrine of Hazrat Masuma. After that description, there's no need to watch that video because I know exactly what you're talking about. And let's just say you're going from the main strip it's on the right hand side,
Yeah.
and then you turn to the left. There's that massive curtain. You say your salams, and we would see that all the time.
Yeah.
And people were carrying like their kids, were carrying bread. They would go and family that had their books. So, but that is a beautiful setup because you got to link the not only your daily life, but also that religious spiritual boost by saying salams to someone like Hazrat Masuma, which is why you said you see her as like a grandmother.
Yeah.
Did you spend any time in Jamkaran?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you spent some time back during the late 90s and early 2000s, but when people didn't have the chance to go back to Iraq during Arba'in, we used to have an Arba'in walk from Jamkaran to Sayyidah Masuma.
Subhanallah.
During the Arba'in. And it was set up the same way. You know, you have the mawakib throughout the way, and essentially people used to take a car to Jamkaran in the morning. They would have lunch there, and then they would start walking back to Haram Sayyidah Masuma. And then I remember that every year. Every year we used to go. You know, and that's what I'm telling you. It's like a mini religious pilgrimage that we had there, and we grew up in that beautiful environment. And you know, we were lucky because if we had decided to live in another state or another place in Iran, we couldn't have experienced that. And so those of the people who have lived in Iran know exactly what I'm talking about. There is a holiness to your life that comes from being in Qom and living in Qom. Those who have lived in Syria will also say, I don't know, but they say that they get the same holiness from Sayyidah Zainab by living around the Sayyidah Zainab. Salamullah alayhi.
Now that you mention it, I do see a link between the two shrines. They even have a similar kind of setup because Sayyidah Zainab's shrine was actually a lot smaller than I expected, which the size of the shrine doesn't really matter. But it's the fact that because it's smaller in my head, I feel a more intimate connection.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, wow, this is the shrine. I'm a lot closer to her physically as well. And you make that link as well. That's it. I never thought about it like that. And with, you know, the whole walk from Jamkaran, the Jamkaran shrine towards the Sayyidah Masuma, was that the kind of setup, that Mawqib kind of setup, did they have that even before?
Yeah. So
like Saddam?
Yeah, before, because
wow.
if you look at the history of the Iraqis, even back to the time of the Mutawakkil Abbasi and many of the Abbasi Khalifa, people used to go walking to the shrine of Ahlulbayt alayhis salam, especially the shrine of Imam Hussein alayhis salam. It wasn't necessarily always during the time of Arba'in, so they would go and visit all the time, even during the time of Imam Sadiq alayhis salam, when people used to come to his house and he used to ask them, have you been to my grandfather Hussein alayhis salam? And they say, no. Have you been every day? They say, no. Have you? And he asked them, have you been there every week? And they say, no. And he says, have you been there every month? Until he gets to the point where he says, do you go there at least once a year to visit the shrine? So the idea of visiting the shrine and walking was always there. But especially during the time of Saddam, when Saddam put a direct ban on those traveling and people used to go across the non-traditional path. They used to go through
by the river?
the shortcuts or by the river or the longer cuts, so the longer ways to try to evade the police and the people that were attacking them. So the idea was there. But in Iraq, because everybody was in Iran, because everybody was so hungry to go back to Iraq and visit the shrine of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, they wanted to recreate that opportunity. And it was a great idea. You know, Jamkaran to Sayyidah Masuma was a beautiful, beautiful experience.
Can't beat that.
And I remember the years that we were there was always towards the summer, and they used to give lots of ice cream. That's
the
bonus.
Best. That's always a bonus.
And they used to sit in the cars at the top, and they used to throw the ice cream because so many people were there. They used to come in a bus. They'd have people on top of the bus, and they just throw the ice cream. And then if you get lucky, you put your hand up, and if you can grab it on the way.
So that's literally Arba'in.
Arba'in.
Because literally the Arba'in walk, because I've only done it once, but that exact same setup. Mashallah, you should write stories. We'll get to that, future goals. But Yeah, they will literally throw bananas and pears.
Yeah.
I actually have a video where you can actually see in a certain section where one guy has his hand up and is just waiting to catch something. But an ice cream.
An ice cream.
How nice would
because
that
it
be?
was
Bastani.
Bastani. Bastani kimi. Yeah. They used to have the double. The double sticked one. But these are the moments, that made me who I am.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you're sharing, like, you're not just sharing your experience, but you can actually tell the sweetness of the spiritual journey that you experienced, because you were raised there and you came to Australia, and the link that you made with Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, where he says, make sure you go there, or at least go there once a year. When I went to Iran, I had Afghan, Shia relatives living in Mashhad, and I'm like, guys, you're so lucky. The jealousy came out. I'm like, I'm so jealous of you guys. The ghibta, is that the word?
Or envious.
Envious. There you go. I was like, are you serious? You guys are so honored and blessed to go to the shrine of Imam Rida. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, what are you talking about? They said, we only go there like when someone dies. I'm like, I'll kill you right now. What are you talking about with someone? They literally go there once every 3-4 years. And for me, it's just, I'm just so glad and honored that not everyone's like that, because like yourself, you lived in Qom, you got to experience the sweetness of going past the shrines. I'm sure you're with your family as well every day.
Absolutely.
SubhanAllah. Now tell me about Australia. We've gotten up to the part you were about like 10 years old, you came to Australia. Where did you first come to? Tell me about your experiences. Which high school did you go to from the very beginning?
The lot.
Yeah.
So I came when I was about 10.
Right.
And it was a difficult time because it wasn't quite the end of primary school and it wasn't quite the beginning of high school. And I couldn't speak English at all. I think I spent a few weeks at Auburn Public School, and they said, we're very sorry, we just can't have you here. You don't understand what's going on. You don't understand what people are saying. You just need to find something to do. So we looked at options, and there was an intensive English centre at Chester Hill, which is like a little section of the school put into a corner, and all these, people who were learning the language would just come and they just give them a condensed course in about 3 months. Teaches you a bit of English, bit of geography, bit of Australian culture, bit of mathematics, bit of history, etc. Just to get you up to speed. And then after that, you kind of decide what to do. Depends on where you are in your life. So for me, I was kind of between that primary school and high school. So I spent some time at the IEC, the Intensive English Centre at Chester Hill, and took about 2.5 months. And then I was kind of about the right age to start high school.
Right, yeah.
And then I went to the high school very close to Chester Hill called Birrong Boys.
Birrong, yeah, I've heard of that.
Birrong Boys. Yeah. Usually people hear of it because of the wrong reasons.
That's true.
Not because of other. At the time, we had a good group of kids going through. I stayed in the same school. I kind of had a view that I should stick to one school, be a bit more familiar with the teachers, learn the language a little bit more, have a bit more support if I need it. It was a bit far to where I was living, though. We were living towards the Maryland's Guildford area. And my dad didn't really give me a lift every day. So I had to catch the bus. It took a while to get there every day. So about a 45-minute ride each way. Because the bus, as you know, doesn't just go from point A to point B.
Yeah.
It goes around in circles until it gets you there.
And
Picks up other kids from different schools. And there's a reason why I bring these up, because, even my ride on the bus, 45 minutes, that was precious time. The 45 minutes on the bus was very precious time. I could do a lot in that time. I could study, I could read, there was a lot that you could do. And so, it's 45 minutes going there, 45 minutes coming back.
An hour and a half needs 2 hours a day.
In the morning, yeah. And that's 2 hours of your life. People who live in Sydney, that's very normal for them. They commute an hour to work and that's very normal for them. But time is precious, and if you've got time, you've got to utilize it, and that's what I used to do. You know, if I've got homework, I finish it on the bus. If I've got an exam, I study on the bus, and that's how it happened. And high school was interesting. Like I said earlier, from year 7 to year 10, I was pretty average, maybe less than average. I was just getting to know things. I was getting to explore things. I was learning the system, learning the culture, learning the language, and at the same time maintaining my mother's tongue, the Arabic, and trying to maintain the second language, which was Farsi. I had a view that, you know, speaking more than one language was stimulating. It was good, and I'd heard about others forgetting about the language, and sometimes even their mother's language, and that prospect really scared me. So I actively tried to, and we'll come to how I did that. I actively tried to keep all languages going, you know, at a pretty high level. You know, reading, writing, understanding, keeping all of the elements of the language in place. But I needed to perfect the English language, and I struggled a lot. It took me years. And when I got to year 11 was a good year for me. Because there's a lot as you know, from year 7 to year 10, there's a lot of things going on. The class is all mixed with different groups of students, those who want to be there, those who are just forced to be there. Yep. After year 10 and year 11 and 12, only those that want to be there remain. So the classes shrank. And, you know, when you select your subjects, you get a bit more specialized in the areas that you want to do. And I thrived. I saw where I was going. It clicked. And year 11 was good. I had a lot of support. The school was very supportive. The teachers were extremely supportive. And then year 12 was a good year. It wasn't it was a difficult school to get a good mark in because of its ranking and where it was and the performance of other people. Okay. But it was doable. It was doable. If you had the right attitude and you were doing the right things, it was doable. Yeah. Finished high school in 2009. At the time, I was school captain.
MashaAllah.
It was a massive, massive difference. If you look at me in year 7, you look at me in year 12, it's a huge difference. School captain, I topped all of my subjects, which was, you know, the complete opposite to when I was in year 7. And there was one subject that I had always wanted to top, and I hadn't topped up until year 12.
What subject?
And that was English.
Makes sense.
Right, it was the subject that I struggled with the most. From year 7 all the way to year 11, I was with the same teacher, and there was this other student who was very competitive, extremely competitive. I mean, he was up there, and I knew I only get the chance when I would be in year 12 to kind of get to the same level, and I did it. Year 12 was the year when I came first in English, and it wasn't just any English. It was advanced English.
Advanced English, mashallah.
First in advanced English in the school. Shakespeare, we did Hamlet for our case study. And I wrote 2 essays for my HSC. And I got a band 5, which was something that was very, very, very hard to do in advanced English. And even my teacher said later that she didn't expect that to happen. Wow. That was the moment when I knew that, you know, if you did the right things and you had a goal, you could achieve it.
Absolutely. And the fact that, like, well, I guess this one teacher, you've brought her up a few times. She's kind of like that guardian angel.
She is. I still keep in touch with her.
Oh, wow.
Still keep in touch with her. I'm very active. I go back to the school a lot. I try to give back to the school. I give talks to the kids there. Just a little bit of encouragement to try to get people on the path to utilize school as their catapult or their basis to try to get into something,
To try to excel.
And excel.
Yeah, mashallah. And another thing, so did your confidence grow from year 7 to year 12?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It wasn't just my confidence. I started growing taller.
Ah, mashallah, the basketball came in.
The basketball came in. I got into sport. And one of the things that helped me keep my languages up, I knew that to speak English, I needed to hang around people that spoke English. I knew that. But I couldn't do it because sports I was playing, soccer, who gets attracted to soccer? Our groups of our boys, Arabic speaking, Persian speaking boys. So I don't want that.
And they don't even speak, they just play the
They
game.
just play the game and they just get angry.
That's
They're
it.
just angry,
There wasn't much dialogue happening.
Nothing happening. And I didn't want that. I knew in order to succeed, you had to learn the English language. So I looked around one day at lunchtime, looked around the school, and I looked at who was playing what sport. And if you go to Birong Boys, it's still the same. You can stand on this little hill, and then you can have a good view of all of the sports. There's a basketball courts there, there's a cricket net there, there's a massive big kind of football oval there. People play soccer and football and things like that. There is, handball courts on the right side, on the left side. And I'm looking and I'm thinking, okay, if I end up playing rugby, then I'm either dead or broken within a couple of weeks.
Did your parents let you? That's another
Probably
thing.
not. Yeah. Probably. I wasn't built for that though. We had groups of other students who were playing that. And then, so one of the reasons why I tried to look at a way to succeed in the English language. And I wanted to keep learning the English language. And I knew that the way to learn the English language would be to remain around people that spoke the language.
Sure, yeah.
And I didn't know how to do that. And so one day I was kind of wandering around at lunchtime. There's a little hill at the school. It's still there. I stood on it and I had a look at all the different sports that were being played. In one corner you had the cricket nets. In one corner you had the basketball courts. In one corner you had a whole bunch of people playing touch footy. In another corner you had a big open field, people playing soccer. They even played AFL and all of the different types of Australian sports. Then you had the handball courts on the left
good
side.
old handball.
The handball. And they had all the drawings and things on the floor. And then I'm thinking to
hopscotch?
myself,
Any hopscotch?
nah.
That was just okay.
That was just you.
That was just me.
And then I'm looking, I said, if I play rugby, I'll probably end up with broken bones.
True.
And I'm not built for that.
Right.
Or if I play basketball, there was a certain group of people playing basketball, and I didn't think I would be able to integrate well with that group.
May I say, Asians or Samoans? Which one?
More the Asians.
Asians.
The
there you
Samoans
go.
were playing the rugby.
They were playing
and
rugby
they were
as well.
big fellas, and they could take a hit or two, but I couldn't. And then I'm looking in the corner and I'm thinking, God, that's an interesting sport. I've never seen it. And they were carrying bats and they were throwing the ball and they were playing cricket. And I'm like, that's an interesting sport. Let's look into that. So I did a little bit of research and read into it. And I'm looking and I went there and I saw just a whole bunch of different people all speaking English. I said, this is perfect.
Were there Indians in that group?
Plenty of Indians,
Yeah.
lots of Aussies. That's where I picked up my Aussie accent.
Ah, how's
Lots
that?
of Aussies, how's that? Got him. And they started playing cricket. And all I did was every lunchtime, I brought my lunch, sat down and watched them play. I just watched. That's all I wanted to do. Just wanted to learn, just hang around the people. And then I learnt the sport and played it. And I'm a big fan of cricket.
Does Iraq have a cricket team?
Absolutely not. I get that question all the time. Iraq does not have a team, But Emirates, interestingly, has a team, and they're hosting quite a lot of the cricket games. In fact, the current T20 World Cup for the women's is being run in the UAE.
Oh, wow.
In the heat of the UAE.
They must-
God help them.
Wow, they need to drink a lot more water.
Lots of water. But thankfully, they're only playing T20 and not Test cricket.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
That's how I maintained my English language.
You're right. You know how you said we'll leave that to a side. So I can see how it would all unfold, because that's the one sport that's not contact and concert dynamic. You actually get to stand around and speak and connect.
Absolutely. And it was skill. You had to
Correct.
learn.
It's a skill-based sport.
You had to get into the mind of your players. You had to get into the mind of your opponent. And if you played the longer version of the sport, you learn about patience and perseverance, which many people, in the day of social media and Instagram and other social medias, don't kind of understand the idea of patience and perseverance, which are really important to have.
Fundamental traits.
Fundamental.
And so, did you have any difficulty making friends? Not being able to speak English early on?
That was a barrier.
Okay.
Certainly. But no, I think I think my personality is quite open to having friends and being in that situation. And it was hard in the beginning. There were different groups of people. There was all sorts of things like bullying and things that happens that you see. But the important bit was to identify what you're good at and try to improve on that and try to use that. The way I tried to maintain that was compartmentalize. So, recess lunch is this. When I'm in class, I'm in class. So you do everything based on the time frame given to you.
Yeah. And so that ability to use your time wisely definitely came from a young age.
Absolutely.
You would use your time in the buses,
Absolutely.
studying, learning and stuff. How about at nighttime at home? Any extracurricular activities?
So I've always had the view that a well-rounded person has to do more than just what you do in the 8 hours of the morning.
Correct. Right.
And I had, and this is something we learnt when we were young, is that weekly events or nightly events or going to the majalis and going to the mosques and things like that was a big part of the community. In addition to that, when I was in Iran, from a religious point of view, my dad had the option of having us go to the Hawza, just from a young age to get to know what it's like, or to become reciters. And my brother and I were involved in the group of reciters led by Al-Hajj Abu Bashir al-Najafi and Mulla Jalil Karbala'i, a whole bunch of very big reciters at the time who were living in Iran, and they had a group of other potential reciters or reciters to be. And if I list you the names of the people that were as part of that group of reciters, you'll be surprised because they are all number one reciters in Iraq at the moment. Sheikh Zaman al-Hasnawi, Mullah Muhammad Baqir al-Khaqani, Ahmad al-Ka'bi al-Karbala'i, Sha'ar Ahmad al-Lami. A whole bunch. The people listening to this will know the people I'm talking about.
Yeah, correct.
Mullah Jalil al-Karbala'i. Even Mullah Basim at the time was not, he couldn't come to Iran due to some issues with his entry and exit. And majority of the poets that were providing qasaid to the reciters, and the majority of reciters now in Iraq and in Iran actually started from that very humble small group. And we were part of that group. And as part of that, we were reciting in Arabic and Farsi. And when we came to Australia, we tried to keep that link. We tried to stay. And the way we did it was, at night after school, there's always something on. So Saturday night programs, Thursday night programs, the events happening during Muharram, the events happening during Ramadan. It kept me busy.
can imagine.
Very busy.
You're going to have to give us a bit of a taster. I need to hear the voice. We'll get to that.
Inshallah. And effectively, we had something on every night. Effectively.
Yeah. Especially if, and what center did you go, or what organization were you affiliated with?
That was really interesting.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why my dad didn't want us to go and pursue the Hawza studies in Iran was that he didn't want us to be affiliated with a group.
Right.
He said, and I remember this, and I was very young. When my dad had these conversations with us, I was very young. I was less than 10 years old. And he said, I don't want you guys to be affiliated with a group. You are the servants of Imam Hussein alayhis salam, and Imam Hussein is who you should represent. You shouldn't be affiliated with a group. You shouldn't have any ties with any group. You shouldn't follow any political gains. You're doing this for the Imam Hussein. And he is the ultimate master to have. So you don't need anyone else. You go to the master. And that resonated in our minds. And when we came here, that was what we wanted, was not to be affiliated with a group. And everybody knows that my brother, who's the older brother of mine, and I would go to any place that would invite us.
Do you have any other siblings?
I have two brothers. An older brother and a younger brother.
Yeah, wow. 3 boys in the house?
All boys.
All boys.
All
Just like me,
boys.
3 boys. And you're in the middle.
I'm in the middle.
MashaAllah.
In the middle.
And your brothers also, are they both reciters?
No, my older brother is a reciter. In fact, I learned a lot from him. When we came to Australia, we used to do lots of duo readings. Both of us would go up and read and recite. But that kind of died down. Just through commitments and having 2 people reciting in different centres was much more better for the community because of the availability of reciters and things. So we decided that that was a nice thing to do.
What's the age gap?
It's about 8 years.
The reason why I say that is because we have 3 brothers and I'm the eldest and there's about it's about 7 year, actually closer towards 8 year age gap between myself and my middle brother, who's also a reciter. And somehow the youngest brother what's the age gap between yourself and your youngest?
It's about 6 or 7 years.
6 or 7 years, mashallah. And it's amazing. I'm just looking at the links and parallels and you would recite. So when you were in Sydney, where would you recite? Where would you go? Were there all Arabic programs or any Farsi?
So we started with Arabic programs. Quite a lot of the centres, I mean, I was very young at the time. So I was reciting very short events and mostly during the celebrations. And I used to read before my brother on the commemorations during the Shahada. I spent a lot of time reciting in Arabic, but one of the ways I thought would be good to maintain my Farsi was to recite in Farsi. And so I looked into a few centres, and they were all close by, and I would either recite Arabic and Farsi at the same time, or if they are a Farsi centre, then I just recite in Farsi. And that's one of the ways that I maintained the Persian language through the recitation.
Yeah, nice. And with your recitations, any particular like style, or were they all like the Nasheed Latmiya type? Did you do any adhan, Quran, or any form of dua, ad'iyah that you would recite? What are the types of recitations that you were mainly involved with?
Look, initially it was mostly recitations of Nawha and a Nasheed. At the time, my voice was breaking as I was reaching puberty.
Yeah,
and so things were not very easy going at the time. But then I looked into other options and I learnt the basics of recitation of the Quran, and I got into reciting the Quran, not to a professional level, but to a level where I was able to read the Quran very well during our Ramadan khatma. And at the same time, I had the opportunity, because of my involvement with the centres on a regular basis. So if I'm not doing any anashid, I would then do the Quran. If I'm not doing the Quran, I would do the dua.
Right.
And it was mostly to fill a gap so that the program would remain alive. And that's how we became to do more of the all-round version and presentation when we come to the majalis. I think every part has its own beauty. The recitation of the Quran requires a group of people who understand the Quran. And in Sydney, we've come a long way in the recent years about appreciating the Quran and understanding the Quran, the recitation of the Quran. Back in the day, it wasn't as important, unfortunately. It's come a long way. Ad'iyah and ziyarat, more people are doing more events in their houses and becoming more, exposed to all the ad'iyah and the ziyarat that we actually have in our religion, which is, if you read Mafatih al-Janan on its own, a book of ad'iyah and ziyarat, for every day of the year, there's something for you to recite. So that was a blessing for us. It also strengthened our Arabic language by reciting the Quran and reciting the ad'iyah and the ziyarat, and kept us linked with our community, which was really important to do after a day at school or a day at university or something like that.
MashaAllah. And very, very much well-rounded, because you got to, I'm just seeing categories within the category. It's not just, I'm doing my Islamic things, but you got to enjoy a taste of Quran, a taste of doing the Latmiya recitations and the Nasheed Nohas. What would you say was your, favorite one, your go-to, or your main interest from the recitations?
Look, my main interests were a Nasheed and the Noha, because that's what we got taught from a very young age. We learnt, I even remember at one point when we were very young, they used to teach us where our voice would be and how to try to play around with your voice to go to the higher notes and stay on the lower notes. And that was fascinating for me, turning a sentence, into something that was much more grand than just a sentence, or pronouncing the word. And even in the Quran, this happens a lot when you're reciting the words of the Quran, is that if the context of the verse of the Quran is a sad one, then the skill of the reciter comes in, where you can take that verse and recite it in a sad tone. Or vice versa, if it's a happy tone, or if it's a harsh tone where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning about something, your tone changes to the setting of the verse. And that was a skill that was really important to master, because when you've got a poem, it's a poem written, and the Iraqi poems, if you've read some, you would know, for those that speak Arabic, would see that the Iraqi poetry is the strongest poetry that you can get. It's extremely powerful. It's extremely well written, and it rhymes very well. There is there's no way of comparing it to any other poetry, not even Persian poetry. Persian poetry is more prose. You kind of read it. It's more about reading it rather than performing it. While Iraqi poetry is about exploring emotions, understanding context. And the poets who started writing poems now in the last 20 years became so good at it that they started incorporating more than just a story. It became like an animation. You imagine the event that the poem is talking about. And you start looking at the skill of the poet as 50% of the presentation. The other 50% of the skill of the presenter or the reciter. And the reciter will take the poem to 100%. And that's when you have a successful night when you're performing. So that's what made the anashid and the qasaid. And the more you get involved, the more experience you get, the more people you get involved with, the other people that you start talking to, and you learn from others, you learn from other people's mistakes, you learn from your own mistakes. I used to, and I still do with every performance that I do, I watch the whole thing when I finish multiple times to see where I can improve, what I've done well, what I can do better. So those are the two areas that I liked. The sad events, the Noha and the Anashid in the happy events.
Which kind of makes sense because you said that if you were to go throughout the Holy Quran recitation route, that people kind of needed to understand the Holy Quran. I'll have some more of not just like everyday Muslims who go to the mosque, but people who can kind of understand and appreciate the science of the Quran. So you kind of need to, I'm not trying to say live up to their expectations, but you do kind of need to tick a box. But when it comes to recitations, Nohas, Latmiyas, and Nasheeds, it appeals to more of an emotional basis. There isn't like technical, of course, there is a technicality that needs to be achieved and maintained. But, you know, when your kid and your mum is listening to a recitation while she's cooking in the kitchen, she's not looking at the technicalities, she's enjoying it, she's listening to it. Even if it's a sad one, she's enjoying, there's beauty in that, the art. What I want to ask is, did you, like when you recite, firstly, do you write your recitations?
Predominantly no.
Okay, yeah.
So I know my limitations, and that's a skill that is really difficult to master. It's very tempting to try to do everything, but I know my limitations, and I knew that poetry is one area that if I go down the path, maybe I'll do well in. But I was already good at one thing,
which is the recitation.
And there's quite a lot of poems and poetry out there, and I opted to go with. I write some poetry when required. But not to the extent of on a regular basis.
And I can kind of see that just by looking at your personality as you speak, you kind of had that personality trait where if you stick with one thing and if you're proud with that and you go ahead through the full term from year 7 to year 12 in the one school, stick with the same teacher, stick with what you're good at, you're really going to excel in it. And how much of a effect did that have on your poetry of you sticking with like your language or the language that you're good at or the style of recitations? How much of an effect did that have for you and like your family around you?
That had a big effect because I was able to master the skill. You know, the more that you practice, the more that you do, the different groups of people that you read towards, you start having a style of your own, and that's where you start excelling, and that's where you become better at what you do. And you want, because this isn't about, oh, how good am I? You know, I'm going to recite. What you're doing is, first of all, you're giving something back to the community.
Of course.
You're giving up your time. If people come and have a look at my house and how I've set up the qasaid, I've got, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of poetry that I go through a lot of the times throughout all the events throughout the year. And sifting through those takes a lot of time. People don't appreciate this. They may not know about it, but it takes us quite a lot of time to prepare for a 10-minute nasheed presented on a birthday of one of the imams. That 10 minutes in my schedule takes about 2 hours of preparation.
Wow.
It's about finding the right poem, finding the right melody, reading the poems, not making a mistake, turning up to the place, driving there, performing, doing the best that you can, and then leaving and getting feedback. And people are very honest.
Yeah, they can be.
They can be very honest. And they say, oh, why did you do this way? Why did you read this way? What today wasn't as good? I said, no problem, thank you. Give me some feedback and I'll take it on board and I'll change it for next time.
100%.
And so that humbles you, it makes you, and you're not doing it for a return. That's the biggest thing. And if you ask a lot of the people out there, and you ask them, you know, what do you get the most satisfaction out of? What activities? You know, they'll say something about, you know, activities of volunteering, giving something back to the community. They won't say, you know, I get something back from my day-to-day job because, you know, that's what you're expected to do. You turn up, you do the work, you get paid, come back home. So you're giving something back to the community. You're volunteering your time. You're sacrificing a lot of time with family too. And that's come a lot as well because, you know, I spent a lot of time outside for my studies and other things that I've had to do. And as well, when I come back home, I have to go back to recite and prepare and do things. And, you know, when Muharram comes, Muharram is a different kettle of fish.
Lockdown period.
It's a lockdown period. Yeah. The preparation starts, you know, a year before.
Wow.
One whole year before.
How? So
yeah,
that's amazing.
So
a year before.
1 year before. For me at least, The
Wow,
preparation
mashallah.
starts 1 year before, where you started putting everything together. You speak to poets, and you have arrangements with poets. You know, you look at all the options for all the 13 nights that you go through Muharram, and you don't always just have one majlis. You might have 2 or 3, or during the day you go somewhere, or during the afternoon you go somewhere, or someone's house. You always need to have a plan B, C, D. For me, it's always more than just an A, B, C. There's always more than one option. And I've been known to change last minute based on who I see in the group. So if I turn up to an audience that I thought was different to what I'm reading, I'll change it.
Match it in accordance to.
I'll just
the
match
people.
it.
Yeah.
Oh, and when I go to the majalis, you'll often see a big bunch of papers in one of my pockets and a big bunch in my other pocket. And that's my plan B.
That's your backup copies.
That's my backup. And there's a third one in this pocket.
Oh, wow.
There's always a third
We need to
option.
get you an iPad.
I think there was an etiquette that we got taught as we grew up about the member, which unfortunately it's being diluted as we speak. There were a lot of things that were not allowed.
Right.
Yeah.
Electronics would be one of them.
Electronics is one of them. The setup of the way what you wear, clothes wise, how you do your hair, you know, what jewelry you're allowed to wear. Things have changed a lot.
But that makes sense, because you speak about how it's not just the words, how your body is meant to articulate what you're saying. Like, for example, an example that I always see is, you know, being from an Afghani culture, looking at the works of Mulla Dr, for example. A lot of people see him and they see his motions and his movements, and some people would be like, okay, that's interesting, that's different. We don't really see that, especially in Persian cultures. But now that you kind of explain it, everything he's doing is kind of trying to explain not just the words and what the words represent, but he's physically trying to embody the sadness. And I can kind of put 2 and 2 together and see that, okay, that's maybe why specifically in Iraqi, you know, let's just say area that they do Sinazdani or recitations, that they feel that energy a little bit more, because it's not just what you hear, it's what you see. And the reciter must get exhausted towards the end.
Absolutely.
How do you recover?
Sleep.
Sleep.
Muharram is a sleeping month for me. Often 16 hours, 14 hours, 18 hours.
Do you work during that time as well?
Depends. Depends on the year. But traditionally, I try to take some time off. But it doesn't always happen.
I can imagine.
But yeah, sleep is the number one fixer of all problems. You wake up a new man every night. And we call it al-inaya al-ilahiyya or inayat al-Imam Hussein alayhis salam, where the Imam intervenes to get you through the line, to get you over the line. And that's what happens. During the 13 nights of Muharram, there are things that happen that are outside of your control. You do your best and your performance gets taken up by a different entity, and you perform under the guidance of somebody. You don't deal with what happens. You are guided. It's something that I can't explain.
You're right, because that's kind of what a lot of people who do the Arba'in walk, they
Yes.
get exhausted.
Yeah.
I was exhausted, and I woke up the next day, and you can tell that inayat of Imam Hussein
Yeah.
is there. Or for me, it was more of a night of Sayyida Zainab. I felt like, because salamullah alayhi, because you're exhausted throughout the day. At night time, you have cramps, your feet no longer work, but you wake up after like a 3-hour sleep on a floor, and you're energized.
You're back to normal.
And that's what you would experience every Muharram.
In fact, every night.
Okay, wow.
Every night. And every night has a setup, has a moment, you know, things happen. And every event throughout the year is the same. But Muharram has a particular taste, you know, where your performance is elevated to the maximum that you can give. It's the time of year where you shine.
It's a spirited moment.
There is a spiritual component to it. And it builds up towards that 10th night, and you know, in fi qalb al-mu'minin harara, just like the
That
Imam
fire.
says, the fire that doesn't stop. And that fire is, you know, always there.
So how often, like, do you recite? If we wanted to come and see your recitations live in Sydney, where often do you recite? Do you have like on your profile, do you is it advertised where you recite?
Yeah, generally on our social media platforms, we try to advertise. There's quite a lot of events. At the moment, within the Sydney area. Recently, we've had some events in Brisbane, and we're looking at expanding other events as well in other states and overseas, hopefully too.
Inshallah.
But the opportunities are there. And I find it to be a really important part of the development of anybody is to explore ways of giving, not just to the one place or the one community or one geographical area. You know, I've recently tried to touch base with some of the Afghan communities because I've got a common language with them. I've tried to touch base with the Urdu community, even though I don't speak Urdu, but I've recently embarked on English poetry, which is not the same as Arabic poetry, as you know. But whatever you can to try to bring the message of Ahlulbayt alayhis salam to the people. And I know myself, I speak the three languages and I want to utilize them and I know the Arabic is my strength and the strongest and I perform the best in. But at the same time, I know that the other languages are important. Yeah. And giving back to the community is very important.
And that's your gift as well. That's your God-given gift to be able to have these three languages, particularly the Farsi and the Arabic, and really excel in it. Because the word leadership, and I recently got introduced that the word leader actually means the one who assists the most, the one who helps the most. We typically think of a leader as someone who sits back and, delegates. You do this, you do that. Sayyid Hassan, I'm not sure if you're watching, Sayyid Hassan Budarsi. But using Sayyid Hassan.
He's more a manager.
Manager, leader, he is the person who does the most amount of work. And so when you come to majalis where there are people giving lectures, reciting Quran, and people like yourself doing the recitations, you're in a position of leadership. And you're therefore in a position of service a lot more, which I find that, truly does resonate. Me, even just sitting here listening to you, there's a lot of work being involved up there and reciting. And hats off to you, mashallah. May Allah give you all the strength. And like you said, it truly is something that is God-given. It's a gift. And I'm really happy that you share that story. But I want to know, we've gotten all the way to year 12, 2009.
2009.
Tell me, my friend.
Big year, 2009.
Big year. How so?
I applied for a scholarship, a few scholarships actually. And I got a scholarship at the University of Western Sydney worth $50,000.
You mentioned University of Western Sydney, not Western Sydney University.
No, that was after
We've gotten all the way up until when you finished high school, which was 2009. Tell me, what happened from 2009 onwards?
2009 was a big year.
Big year? How so?
I was doing 7 subjects for my HSC and I only needed to do 5.
Wow. So is that 14 units?
14 units.
Wow.
And that was partly because I needed to explore my options for university. I wasn't really entirely sure what things were going to be like. I had a bit of an idea that I wanted health. And from my background, from the way I was brought up, the things that I saw back in Iran, back in Iraq, I was interested in health, but wasn't quite sure. I was pretty young, pretty immature. And I wanted to make a mature decision. So I explored my options and I looked at doing 7 subjects. Crazy thing, looking back now.
Amazing.
Crazy. And I applied for some scholarships. I had a very, very supportive careers advisor. I still keep in touch with her. She's one of my other people that I look up to a lot.
Guardian angels.
Another guardian angel. There's a few of them.
Alhamdulillah.
And she guided me through a lot when I was in high school, early university years, throughout university, throughout my professional life. She was there a lot. She's still there a lot now. I applied to a few scholarships and I got a scholarship at the University of Western Sydney. Wow. And that was the Vice Chancellor's Leadership Scholarship. Only 5 of them get given out. And it was worth $50,000. And it was $10,000 cash every year. No strings attached. The only string was that you needed to maintain a minimum pass mark in your degree, which is pretty reasonable. And in order to do that, to maintain the scholarship, you had to obviously get into the University of Western Sydney. So there was a medical degree offered at Western Sydney at the time, but it required quite a lot of things. On top of getting a good mark at school, you had to do an entrance exam called the UMAT exam. Those who remember, it's quite a nightmare of an exam. And you had to do an interview. But when I did the UMAT exam, I didn't do very well. I was still young, 17 at the time. I'm doing 7 subjects, 14 units in high school. Didn't really know what this UMAT thing was. When I did it, didn't do very well. So when I finished my HSC, I knew medicine was not on the table. So I applied for the next best thing, just some option to see what I could do for the year after. And I already had this offer for a scholarship, so I thought I'll do something at University of Western Sydney, which is now called Western Sydney University.
Western Sydney.
I still like the old
It sounds
logo.
way more
Yeah, it had a different logo, like it was beautiful blue, like a tick.
Yeah. And did it have like a bird on top of it?
It did.
Yeah.
And then it said bringing knowledge to life. That was their motto. Wow. It's beautiful.
Now it's the red W.
Yeah, now because there was a big story about that. And I looked at the options and I said, the closest thing is do something in health. So I did a science degree. Officially, it was a Bachelor of Advanced Science. And I was the first person in my family to go to university. It was a big deal. Getting to uni was a big deal because my older brother in Iran had finished high school, but they'd refused entry to university because he didn't have citizenship, and so he had to pay out of pocket, and we couldn't afford it. So it was a big
international.
Deal. That was international.
Isn't it like 3 times as much?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And at the time, we didn't have the money. It was not possible. So I was the first person going to uni. It was a big deal, huge deal in the family. Mum and Dad were super, super stoked. So I got my first $10,000 from the scholarship. I'm in my first year of university. I'm doing science, and I picked up some of those, basic sciences, a little bit of physics, a little bit of biology, a little bit of chemistry, and a little bit of human anatomy.
HAP?
It was human anatomy physiology, but at the time they had split it where it was anatomy separate and then physiology was in the second semester. So in the first semester you would do anatomy only.
Okay.
Only after a few years they combined them together.
I think that makes more sense.
It certainly does.
Just
certainly does.
Go straight through the mechanics first.
Absolutely.
And then what
Form,
it's for. Yeah.
then function.
Love that.
And I remember the first class I had was the 1st of March, 2010. Monday morning, 8 o'clock. I still remember it.
The time.
8 o'clock. And the lecturer was teaching about human anatomy. And he was talking about Sir William Harvey. And he was talking about how he came up with a circulatory system. And that was like music to my ears. It was the beauty of the human body. That was when the spark kind of went off, that probably medical was where I was going to head. Fast forward about 12 months. Actually, fast forward 6 months. We're in a physics class, 3-hour lecture. It was also a Monday morning. Halfway through the physics lecture, gone off for a little break, have a bit of a coffee. A friend of mine says, you know that there is a university in Queensland that is offering dentistry without the need to do the UMAT, and there's no interview. So there's no need for you. So
you need to do UMAT for dentistry as well?
At the time.
Correct. Right.
I have to say, I didn't know much about dentistry at the time. I'd done lots of research about medicine and what it's like, because there was a medical school there at Western Sydney. So I looked into what do I need to do to get into Western Sydney, I sat the UMAT again in that year and I didn't do very well. So I knew my options were very limited. So he dared me to apply. He said, "I dare you to apply."
Was
And
it
I'm like,
Halloween?
it wasn't. No. Maybe
That
it was
would've been a
April
good story.
Fool's.
It was April Fool's.
Maybe it was April Fool's. But he dared me to apply. And then, like, to apply for another state, you have to go and put all the preferences and you have to pay $50, $60 for their university admission centre so that you can put it in. So what did I do? I went to the Queensland website. It was called QTAC at the time. In New South Wales, it was the UAC. In Queensland, it was the QTAC. And then I put, and guess what preference? I put Queensland University Medicine first. Even though knowing my UMAT was rubbish and I wasn't going to get in, there was something in my head saying, I'll just put it up there. And then I did like James Cook University Medicine second, and then a whole bunch of other ones. And then there was only one more room left and I couldn't think of a degree to put. And then I remembered this guy's there. This university, so I tried looking for it and I found the degree and I put it there as number 8, or the last preference. And that was just done because you do it 3-4 months in advance and then you forget about it.
100%.
The year is almost finished. I've done reasonably well in the year. My GPA was okay. It was pretty good. But everything else was terrible. UMAT was terrible. I was pretty flustered. I was like, pretty hard done by.
Because by that time, sorry to interject, but by that time you've already done school.
Yeah.
Which sounds to be a bit more difficult for you to have to not just do the school education side, but learn the culture, Australian culture, do your recitations. And by this time you're like, bruh, I'm exhausted.
Yeah, exhausted. Yeah, and because there's lots of self-directed learning, no more spoon feeding like they do in high school. Everything, you give you a textbook and go and read it. Get an exam in 2 weeks' time. So when I saw that, when that happened, I applied 2010. Come about January 2011, I get this random email. Congratulations on being accepted to the University of such and such for dentistry. I'm like, this must be a joke.
It's your friends.
Yeah, some sort of spam or someone trying to, like a money grabbing thing.
Yeah.
And, traditionally, when you go through QTAC, QTAC will send you an email saying you've been accepted. The university never calls you directly. So I'm like, there's something sus about this. And I'm looking at, and something had happened in the January of 2011 where there was a massive flood in Queensland. Huge flood. Do you remember?
100%.
Remember? And then I'm looking
was
into
devastating.
the QTAC office was inundated with water. So they were out of bounds. There were no communications coming out of QTAC.
100%. Yeah.
Nobody knew what was going on. And then I receive a second email from the university. Your enrollment pack has been sent to your postal address. Please, when you accept it and get it, let us know so that you can. And then I pick up the phone and call QTAC. No one answers. Pick up the phone and phone the university. And they said, oh, yeah, you've been accepted. So you just need to accept the offer because you've only got 1 or 2 days left. You have to accept the offer. So here I am come to my dad and my mum, and I'm like, I got into dentistry. I said, what is this? What is dentistry? Tell us more about it, etc. And we go through the things. So what do we need to do? Is like, I have to move to Queensland. They said, no way. You're only 18. That's not happening. 19 at the time. Leaving on your own, where are you going to live? We'll all come with you.
Yeah, I love it.
Standard family, Iraqi, Afghan family. Don't worry, we come with you.
Hello.
We are there with you. I'm like,
chai.
Dad, what do you mean? You are already living here. You want to come with me and do what? Okay, it's like, no, there's no way you're leaving on your own.
Of course.
And I was like, okay, come with me. I said, right, come with me. So we catch a plane to the Gold Coast.
DC.
Went down to I was like, let's go and find a place to try to live all together. And then we look at the rent and all the things that are happening, and it said, no, not happening. And then I had a bit of a discussion with him. I said, look, I think this is the best option I'm going to get. I don't think I could do it any other way. So I accepted, without telling my dad, of course. I accepted because I needed to accept. Didn't have time. And then I had the discussion about that. And I convinced him. I said, I'll share with somebody over there. I'll come back on my holidays, etc. That was the best decision I ever made. 5 years on the Gold Coast. Beautiful 5 years, probably the best of my life. Yeah.
Get to be by the beaches, man.
By the beach. Yeah. Fishing every day,
paradise.
Surfers Paradise, Southport, beautiful part of the world. 5 years there, did pretty well. Finished the dentistry, but there was something not quite right. I kept on going back to that spark on the Monday morning on the 1st of March, 2011, 2010. I had to, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm in my final year of dentistry, is there an option? Is there a particular way I could maybe do medicine? And I'm looking at the options, etc. I'm studying for my final exams for dentistry. We had quite a lot of exams to study for. And there was this exam called the GAMSAT, which is equally as terrible as the UMAT, but longer. So
That's postgrad, right?
postgraduate. Yeah, because I'd already finished. I'm finishing dentistry and this is my final year. And I said, look, I'm just going to give it a go. Right? I really didn't expect the turn of events that were going to happen next. I really just said, I'll do it for the sake of doing it. And I did it in that year. And I didn't score a stellar mark. It was a reasonable pass mark in the GAMSAT.
Which is still pretty hard to get.
But it wasn't it wasn't an automatic thing where you say, "Yep, that's the mark I got. I'm confident I'm getting in." It wasn't the case. I've applied in that year. I get the GAMSAT, and I've just randomly applied to all the universities in Australia. Now, if they accept me, the chances of them accepting me were like close to 5% in my calculations. I didn't think I had a good chance. And then things kind of really quickly progressed. And then I was studying for my final dentistry exam when I got an interview offer to come to Sydney to interview at the medical school. And I accepted that, came down and interviewed in Sydney. And then I was like, surely there is no way they'll accept me. They take 5,000 applications every year. 5,000 applications. They only interview 330. So the number of people they interview from the total number of people applying is ridiculous. So I'd gotten the interview. The moment I had the interview, I had a feeling that there was a chance. There's 1 in 3 chance of getting in because they took 100 and something people. So I interviewed. I was very sick on the day of my interview, but I'd made a nidhr to Baneen, salam alayha, that if I'd accept that I'd do something. And then I got accepted, did 4 years of medicine as a postgrad, and I was working as a dentist during my time as training. Because of how close both degrees were, my medical degree was relatively slightly easier to do because I was doing a lot of the stuff. There's lots of repetition of the basic sciences and things.
And you get some hands-on practical experience in your job. Yeah.
And then as things progressed along, I knew medicine was mine. It was for me. I'd gotten in, I'd finished it. I'm in the hospital system, spent a couple of years in the hospital, and then looked at different options as to what to do. A few of the specialty options required quite a lot of time and investment and commitment and sacrificing family and not having a family even, not having kids, and that was something that I couldn't do. Sacrificing community service was on the line, and that was very close to happening if I had chosen a different specialty path. That required more night shifts and more on-call and more things to do outside of normal hours. And that was an extremely difficult decision, to choose your career over something else, especially something that I'd been involved in for such a long time. And then I chose to choose the community, and I chose general practice as a doctor. So I'm almost finished with training now. So GP doctor and dentist, and I do both. So I spend 2 days there, 3 days there, 4 days. This depends on what's happening. But I find myself doing both very well. So as long as I'm doing them both very well, I continue.
And I think using your words, not against you, but for you, Would you not say that that's the inayat of Imam Hussein?
That is exactly what it is. And I don't regret the decisions that I've made. And there were many times when the inayah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam came in. One of the years, all of the 10 days of Muharram were coincided with 10 continuous days of exams.
Which year was that?
This was one of the years where I recited in Greenacre. So probably 2011, 2012, where Muharram was practically on the days of my exams. And that was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made, because I'd been asked about doing Muharram, and I could have said no very easily, and I would have had a very good explanation to say, I've got studies, I can't do it. But I said, this is more important. And I said yes. And I didn't have time to study for the exams. Didn't have time. And when I turned up, and I used to pull out all-nighters, so after the majlis, I'd go home, study for the exams, and then the next day it would be the exam. And then I turn up to the exam, sleep deprived, but
And that's one of your value points during Muharram, sleep season.
and I need my sleep so I can perform. And the Iraqis, like you can't just read 20 minutes and get down. You have to give the majlis what it's worth. 40, 50, 1 hour, 1.5 hours we've read towards the end of the nights 9, 10 of Muharram.
Very physically demanding.
Extremely physically demanding. You have to take deep breaths. We often go on long walks. Sometimes we go swimming. Sometimes we go running to try to increase our breathing capacity because it's really hard taking deep breaths in and out when you're reciting. And keeping your voice box moist all the time is very hard. I usually drink about 3 or 4 liters of water in preparation for the night. And I usually have half a watermelon. That's my secret. That's how you keep the moisture levels up. And then afterwards, you kind of dump everything through sweat.
Yes.
And then you sleep for hours and then you start all over again. But then I had exams to deal with. And when I would turn up to the exam, everything in the exam that would turn up would be the stuff that I studied the night before.
It's amazing. It's amazing when that happens. It's
amazing when that happens once, but it's even more amazing when it happens 10 times over.
10x.
For every night.
SubhanAllah.
Because it's when you get the opportunity to read somewhere. This is something, I don't know, I never take for granted. I never say no, even if it affects me personal to a personal level. I try not to say no.
Why is that?
Because the Imam gave it to you, the Imam can take it away from you, that inayah. If the Imam gave it to you, gave you the opportunity to do it, he can take it away from you. And if you start picking and choosing about what you want and putting all these conditions about what you want to do, and this is what I do for this, and this is what I want for this, that's when the Imam will take it away from you. And that's the person that is unlucky. So I try not to say no.
Wow. That leaves me speechless. That leaves me so speechless because when you look at it from that aspect of it's a gift, but hey, use the gift. And don't do anything for that gift to be taken away from you. SubhanAllah. That's very wording, that's very moving for me. So that's your why for recitations.
Yeah.
And you kind of spoke about how on that early morning, Monday morning, 1st of March, 2010, 8 a.m., your why was a circulatory, or your interest was a circulatory system. But what is your why for medicine?
Look, why for medicine, I think started from when I was in Iran. The system was very unusual because I remember my mum being pregnant with my youngest brother. And because we weren't citizens of the country, we didn't get access to the public system. So if you didn't have money to give to the private hospital before the woman's about to give birth, they won't let her into the hospital. And to me, that didn't sound right. Like there's a humanistic element, we call it the fitrah. the humanistic basic element that you want other humans to not suffer. And we see it every day now. Suffering is such a normal thing in the news. This many people died after this many rockets hit this many areas. And it's so normal for us. The number of people dying, death is so normal. That really upsets me. There's a sanctity to the human life that we tend to not appreciate. And I felt that sanctity of the human life was affected during that encounter of my mum and my dad needing to get the money so that she could give birth. That was kind of in my mind. When I came to Australia and I realised the system and I learnt about the system, how it works, Medicare, or free medical care for everybody, whoever wants to access to see a doctor. The government would pay on their behalf if you want to go and see somebody, if you want to get surgery, if you're giving birth, you go to the hospital. That idea is the one that resembled with my values.
It resonated.
It resonated with my values. And I wanted to be a part of it. It was, there was a part in my life where I had given up, saying, I don't think I'd ever be accepted. But when you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, عسى أن تحبوا شيئا وهو شر لكم وعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير لكم. And sometimes you may want something or you like it, but it's not good for you. And the vice versa. Something you might not like, but it's actually good for you. So you leave it in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You do everything you can and you ask for inayah from Ahlulbayt. And that's the point that kept us going, kept me linked with my studies. The only reason why I am where I am now is because of the Imam Hussein and Ahlulbayt alayhis salam. Without them, I don't think it would have happened.
It's like you're walking along a path that you cannot see, and they place the pavement, even though you cannot see where you're going.
Yeah.
And
there were moments where I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would cry, very honestly. And I would say, it's not in my hands. I've done everything I could. And it's very hard. When you want something, the human nature wants you to do everything you can to get there. But, when I wanted it, during the times I wanted it, it didn't happen. It was when I had truly given up on the idea and left it in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's when it happened. And I learned big lessons from that.
That makes sense. Just walk the path that God put out for you. And one thing that I wanted to just take aback during your studies when you were in Queensland, during those 5 years, were you able to be involved in any community work? Tell me about that.
Very. Queensland is interesting state. They have, because on the Gold Coast there's not much Shia activity. Most of the activity happens in the Brisbane. Yeah. Which is about a 50-minute drive from the Gold Coast. Yeah, but I recited there in a couple of Muharrams. I was pretty involved. They don't have as much variety there. There's just a couple of centres. But yeah, very involved, and I still keep in touch with most of the centres there, and I get invited back. It's a nice vibe. It's a little bit probably a little bit different to the Sydney environment. The Sydney landscape is very advanced. We have a lot of centres, different groups of people doing all sorts of stuff regularly. In Brisbane, it's much more limited. But I had the opportunity when I was on the Gold Coast. I came back to Sydney and recited a few times in a few years when I was able to, especially when the break coincided with certain events. But when I was in Brisbane, I was doing a lot of work with a few of the centres there. So when you're on a path, you should try to continue it. Don't look for excuses not to do, but look for ways to do.
And being on that path. And mashallah, very spirited about it. You kind of, by sharing your story, it's as though you're trying to send a message to the people. But I want to be a bit more clear on that. Is there, let's break this down into two. What is your message, and who do you want this message to be shared to? If there's anyone out there trying to hear from you, sorry, who are you trying to share this message towards?
Look, I think the message is try your best. Give it your all. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. And who the message is, it's predominantly the youth. I see a lot in our community in particular, and there's a lot outside of our community, but in our community, a lot of opportunities wasted. I'm not saying everybody should become a doctor, everybody should become a dentist, everybody should become a pharmacist. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is take the opportunity to do something in your life. Whether it's knowing that you can't finish school, pulling out early, doing a trade, opening a business, getting married. Those are the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide you with an opportunity for. It will increase your opportunities. You said, follow the path. True, but the path isn't predetermined. You need to put in the effort and the steps for that path to become available to you. You can't just sit in your home, play video games, do this, do that, and expect things to just happen. It's not going to happen. Take an opportunity, do it. If you're good at something, do it to the best of your ability. If you want to learn a trade, learn it to the best of your ability. If you know that you can contribute to the community, do it. We see there's an unfortunate thing that I see, and that is our community members only turning up to our centers during the 10 nights of Muharram. But there's 350 other days during the year where there's events all the time. Why not turn up during that time as well? Now, our youth, our kids are now exposed to quite a lot of stuff over the social media and TV and at school, which is in a particular direction, and there's nothing against it to hold it back.
The anchor point.
The anchor point. Yeah. What is actually your value?
Anchoring point.
The anchoring point. And the thing that is important is that I see a lot of our community members turn up to our centers during the 10 nights of Muharram. And it's really sad because on the 10th night, everybody disappears. And that's when the true musab and the true atrocities begin that night. When the Sayyidah Zainab salamullah alayha prays Salat al-Layl while she's sitting down after the grandson of the Prophet, Imam Hussein alayhis salam, has now been shredded into pieces. That's when she starts. That's when the atrocity and the calamity start. And people here leave to go home and get on with their lives after the 10th of Muharram. Why not be involved in the premise of the Imam salamullah alayhi? The premise of the Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was that he didn't want someone like Yazid to take over the Islamic people, the followers of Islam at the time, because of how much of his actions were disgusting. He would drink alcohol in front of people. He would do the haram in front of people. That was the first time where a person who claimed to be Muslim did that. And if you look between Yazid and look at what's happening now in some of the so-called Muslim countries, where alcohol is very normally sold to the general population.
It's actually given as gift.
Yeah. Music and musical festivals on the Holy Lands.
I was just going to say, did you notice that when you?
I noticed that.
I saw that in Umrah, and I'm like,
on the Holy Lands, music and musical festivals. And the interesting thing is, they perform Umrah, go to Mecca, and then go to Jeddah for their whatever they were there for.
There's less haram in MacArthur Square in around town than there is over there.
And so the Imam al-Hussein didn't want this to happen. And he came out, and what do? We come on 10 nights, we cook, we eat, we provide, etc., and we leave. What we need, and the message needs to reach everybody, is that we need to continue being physically present. I'm sick of this virtual thing. Zoom, YouTube. I'll watch it on YouTube. Your child will not watch it on YouTube. Your kids will not watch it on YouTube. If they don't come to the center and see the setup of the center and smell this, there's an inaya that only is present physically when you come to the center. And those who've been through it as a child, I can tell you that you get this adrenaline, endorphin kind of pump that you just don't experience anywhere else when you come to the Majlis al-Hussein. When you shed one tear for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, that makes a massive difference. And sometimes it can be the difference between you being successful in life and not being successful in life.
Absolutely.
So the message is that everybody should look into the generation below them. What are my kids doing? I speak Arabic very well. Am I teaching my kids Arabic? I speak Farsi very well. Am I teaching the second language to my child? Those are the points that I think we're probably missing the point on as second generation living in Australia.
Absolutely. And I think, going back, how you kind of spoke about how you went from Jamkaran to Qom, doing the Iranian, or I say the Qom version of Arba'in walk. That is beautiful because that you get to bring, even though that's in Iran, even though that's the Middle East, that's a Shia country, you're still bringing in those elements of what's very close to the Haram of Imam Hussein towards your culture. How can we bring that here in Sydney? And it's essentially what I'm trying to say is, if you were to look at the camera directly or speak to the Sydney Australian culture and community head on and be very precise in your message to them, what needs to be done, what needs to change, what can they do? Sorry for being very loaded, but what can they do? Because like you mentioned, not everyone's a reciter, not everyone can be a doctor. What can that Shia family, that Shia young boy, young girl, young man, young woman, what can they do to be involved the rest of the 355 days?
55 days.
355 plus 10 nights of Ashura, bring it together. What can be done from today?
Turn up.
Turn up.
That's the first step.
Turn up. Which camera should I look at? Turn up.
Physically turn up to a center.
Okay. I physically turn up to the center. What's next?
It will take itself. It will take you itself. Whether you rearrange the shoes, whether you give tea, whether you drink the tea, whether you do nothing. It starts by turning up. And the shaitan utilizes and seizes this opportunity. It prevents you from turning up. That is the hardest point. And I'll tell you, if you can promise yourself, I'm talking about everybody now, if somebody can promise themselves to go to a center, any center, pick one and go to it once a week for 4 weeks. Just turn up. Don't introduce yourself. Don't give anything. Don't do anything. Just turn up to the center, whether it's a Thursday program, Saturday program, whatever language it is. Just turn up. And the blessings will flow onto you and your life and your family and everything. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will find for you something to do in there. Your presence, we have a saying in Arabic that says when you go somewhere, تكثر سواد, meaning you increase the presence in the place. When you go and there's 50 people, 100 people there, it's different to when there's only 5 or 6 people there.
Percentage matters.
It's percentage matters. All of our centers, there is space. They're not there for a virtual program. COVID is now behind us.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, it's all finished. We should turn up.
Absolutely.
It's a simple message.
And so, okay, now to kind of play good cop, bad cop, because this is spirited, sounds spirited. You can see the spirit, mashallah, in your eyes when you speak about it. But we cannot deny the fact that when we go to the mosque, that, like you said, shaitan likes to lurk in. So you go to the mosque and you may see things, or Islamic Center, Husseiniat, you may see things, you will see things you won't like. What do you do then?
Look, it's inevitable. You will see things you don't like in your place of work. What do you do then?
You adapt, you manage, you work.
You learn to deal with your co-worker who is always turning up late, or is always taking a break for a smoko, or who's not performing to the best of their ability, or dumping work onto you. What do? Do you give up and say, I'm sorry, I go home now, I give you my resignation? No, you find a way. Whether you learn to deal with it, or whether you speak to the boss, or whether you speak to them directly, you learn to deal with it. That's workplace. But why do you not resign? Because you need the monetary value that comes with being at work. The Husseiniya is not different. But instead of a monetary value that you get the spiritual value. Like I said, you don't have to be involved, but if you do want to get involved or speak to someone about something that you don't like, you can either speak to somebody, you can go to a different center. You don't have to be actively involved. And I know many centers, or some centers, have different ways of engaging with the community, and it can be a bit confrontational, but that's okay. We're all humans. And like I said, the shaitan lurks at those opportunities. The ones where if the shaitan sees a whole bunch of people coming to an Islamic center, he won't be happy.
It makes
Find
so
a
much
way.
sense. And even if you look at the Islamic center, the very forefront of Islamic center is a mihrab.
Absolutely.
What does that come? Where does that come from? Harb, war, to be in a state of jihad.
Sin.
So when you go to the Islamic center, you see someone who doesn't say salam to you. What do?
You say salam to them.
You go to an Islamic center.
Someone who says salam gets 69 of the hasanat. And the person saying the salam back gets 1 out of the 70. So you be the one to take all of the hasanat. We shouldn't be bogged down by the specifics. And it comes down to what our intentions are when we go. If our intentions are to find every little mistake in this center, it's bound to fail.
And I think you can take those traits from the mosque and incorporate it into, you mentioned work, but also your family as well.
Absolutely.
So if you have a family member that may not be according to, your standards, even though you may not be according to their standards, it can turn into a very vicious cycle to adopt those traits. How would you say that a combination of being in the medical field, rather being a medical servant, because you sound like very spirited in this aspect, and also being a servant of Imam Hussein, how has that nurtured into you, and what family values would you say are very important that's necessary specifically in Sydney?
Look, in Sydney, there's work takes quite a lot of time. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes too much time from your day-to-day life. I think we need to work at a balance. The balance should be that you should spend time with your family as much as possible. But what better time to spend with your family instead of being in the home? Take your family with you to the mosque. That's one way where you can add spirituality to your family as well as yourself, and you can share those difficult moments with someone in the Islamic center, in the mosque. And that's one way. And the Prophet ﷺ, in one of his traditions, also describes the ideal amounts of times to split. He describes splitting the 24 hours into thirds, spending 8 hours sleeping, 8 hours at work, and 8 hours with the family.
So why do you spend 16 hours sleeping in Muharram?
Exactly. That was in Muharram only. And that's roughly, even medically, if you look at it, that's a very reasonable. And essentially, our system is pretty much divided in that way.
Non-Muslims can incorporate that. Sounds
They
very
do, because it's
very
8
fair.
till 4. That's 8 hours, and then 8 hours of sleep, and then the other 8 hours. Community service is important. Giving something back is important, but spending time with the family is equally as important as well. some of us, and in this day and age with the cost of living crisis, with, the cost of private schooling, the cost of everything else, you might need to work more hours, or your partner might need to work as well. And, those are part of the realities. We can't put our head in the sand and say, nah, don't do that. That's part of the reality. But the other thing that is available is that if you look, there is practically an event happening every day. Many centers have recurring programs on Thursdays, Saturdays, Tuesdays with Dua Tawassul, Fridays with Hadith al-Kisa. Many, many programs have something. And find one day, it doesn't have to be every day, one day a week, where you take your kids, if you can, النقش التعلم في الصغر, there's a saying in Arabic, it says, التعلم في الصغر كالنقش على الحجر. Learning something as a child is like writing something on a piece of rock, or engraving something on a rock. If you engrave something on a rock, does it ever disappear? It remains forever.
Aboriginal culture.
Aboriginal, 60,000 years.
SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah. And this is another point that kind of, you brought light towards the fact we, as a Sydney culture, and you can take this outside the Muslim Sydney culture in general, when you have friends who are non-Muslim, you have friends who are of different, nationalities, colors, people born in Australia, people not. You don't need to always do the standardized having to, pay for a very fine dining restaurants. There are many free alternatives you can do. Sydney is filled with beaches. Sydney is filled with parks. Sydney is filled with, Islamic centers, or even non-Islamic centers for you to go and just experience and enjoy. That's something that, with this crisis, that's something that we can incorporate as well. Do you have anything that I guess is not necessarily seen as a fine dining experience? Something simple, for example, me, ping pong. I love ping pong. I can spend hours playing ping pong.
We should play.
Let's play. Let's go. Let's swap this. What would you say is like your fun, simple recreational thing that you can really be involved in and really enjoy doing?
For me, it's fishing.
Fishing.
And I'm in the process of teaching my kids to do a little bit of fishing too.
Any spots?
Up north,
Okay.
is you catch some nice flathead. Down south, you catch some nice saltwater fish, and it teaches you lots of patience and perseverance. And if you look, if you look at the theme of tonight, and it started with that, and it's probably going to end on that too. Patience and perseverance.
Wow.
You have to be patient to get what you want.
And I think I've patiently waited. Definitely not persevere because I've enjoyed every moment of it. But I want to hear a recitation.
I need to get something out to read. So what would you like us to read?
Honestly, me personally, I'm going to be a little bit selfish here. I want both. I want a bit of Arabic. I want a bit of Farsi. And if, Islamically good things come in three things, if you like to share something in English.
It's very hard, but I'll see what I have.
Whatever you enjoy, whatever you're most comfortable. If it's a happy one, if it's a sad one, I just want to hear. I want to hear you.
Because we are living the moments of the birth of Imam Hussein al-Askari alayhis salam. Hence why I'm wearing the white tonight.
Love that. It looks very good, mashallah.
Thank you.
Very.
I might read some Arabic verses for the birth of the Imam al-Askari alayhis salam.
Bismillah.
العسكري أضاءنا استبشارا ميلاده ملأ الدنا أنوارا فأبو إمام العصر سر طاهر يبقى على مر الزمان منارا أأبا إمام العصر يا سبط الهدى إني بحبكم أطيب مسارا وبودكم تغدو جميع قصائدي نغم الكمات وللأنام شعارا.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You know, for someone who doesn't speak Arabic, it's not hard when you just like sit down and just focus. You can put the two things together. Like from what I could understand, you know, you spoke when the term Abba, like you can clearly, it's clearly obvious that you're speaking about the father of the Imam of Asr. That's like, a lot of people say it's hard to learn a different language. If you sit down and focus and try to like put the piece of puzzle together, there's so many, and firstly, the Quran is in Arabic. That's how I personally like to challenge myself to try to understand Arabic. And I kind of understood.
And the beauty is that because we share such a beautiful faith, our common denominator between our Iraqi and our Iranian friends is our religion, really, because our languages are completely different.
بیت ولایت آمده گلشن امام هادی چشم تو روشن روی سینه قرص قمرت مبارک دیدن جمال پسرت مبارك صلوات
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
And you wanted some English, so we'll give you
please.
a little bit of English. On 17th Rabi', this is the birth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Imam Sadiq. A dawn so bright, two blessed souls emerged in light. The Prophet came the world to guide, with mercy vast, arms open wide. In Mecca sands, his name took flight, Muhammad, leader of day and the night. He taught the hearts, removed the veils, his message clear, it never fails. His message clear, it never fails.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And years would pass, yet still the glow of knowledge pure would ever grow. From Medina's heart, in wisdom's flame, Ja'far al-Sadiq rose in fame. Ja'far al-Sadiq rose in fame.
And we're very honored to be called Ja'fari.
And that's one of the reasons we started with Medina. You know, in our trip in January of this year, we tried to do the 14 Ma'soom. We started in the Baqi', and then we are ending with the Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, salamullah alayhi, inshallah.
SubhanAllah. That journey goes
Beautiful
from,
journey.
you know, when the Holy Prophet said the first of us is Muhammad, the middle of ours is Muhammad, and the last one is none other than Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. To complete this podcast, what's the future look like for Mulla Dr. Karrar Al Kufi?
The future is bright, inshallah. We have a few things in mind. Now that I've completed my studies and I've promised myself and my family no more studying, it's all done. So it would be a combination of professional life as well as trying to explore and look at other ways to trying to serve the community, inshallah, through the recitation of anashid and latmiyat through the events and any opportunities that present. I am very open and alhamdulillah for the opportunity to be given to serve the Ahlulbayt and serve the servants of the Ahlulbayt. Serving the Ahlulbayt is a feat not many people get. Serving the servants is something that we can try to achieve in our day-to-day life, inshallah.
Inshallah. Honestly, I'm so blessed and honored to be able to experience and enjoy the past hour with you.
Thank you.
Your spirits, your energy. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect you.
Thank
May
you.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you the strength, the energy, the inayah. I think the podcast should be called the inayah of, I think, Sydney.
Inayat Ahlulbayt.
Inayat of Ahlulbayt.
Salam alayhis.
You know, it's may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you the strength, the wisdom to not only serve yourself, your family, the future generation, and be an honor for those who came before you, for your
Inshallah.
parents, for your family, for your lineage, and ultimately the Imam of our time. Thank you so much for coming
Thank
on
you.
this
Pleasure.
podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here tonight.
Podcasts like this are really an indication that you have very respected, well-rounded, honorable people in our community to look up to.
Thank
You
you.
don't need to go towards, I mean, yes, there are amazing people who are outside of our school. That you have your good friends, you have good colleagues, love, respect, learn, protect. Well, he has a human family. You know, you see wars. I went to the protest last week, and my thought was, I'm going to see a lot of Middle Easterns. You see people of all different walks of life. Because when a crisis happens, it appeals to everyone. In your everyday life, there are people who you can look up to, but what better people to be involved with, to be learned from than people like yourself who have gone through the ropes. So thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Inshallah, it can be an inspiration for myself, the future generation, the people, the brothers and sisters here today, inshallah. That concludes our podcast with Dr. Mulla Karrar Al Kufi, and inshallah we'll be doing more podcasts on Alwasitv. Thank you very much for listening. Subscribe, share this video, and we'll end it on a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.